to the first youth entrepreneurship webinar of the semester or season. We're super excited to have you all here and to tune in because this is something very special. So if you weren't aware, we did our youth entrepreneurship conference, Global Youth Academy this past summer. And it was something of, innovation. We had to improvise and go online because normally during the ICSB global conference in Paris, we usually have just a week of having youth come and learn about entrepreneurship. So Dr. Terry Bishi enlisted me and the team to put together a 2-week program that incorporate all students from all around the world to learn about entrepreneurship. And Mr. Lucas Vining was one of our panelists during that time for tech entrepreneurship. And we wanted to bring him back because he's involved in so many different things and different ventures. And it's just an amazing person to talk to. Mr. Vining is a Cambodian-American scientist. He's a student entrepreneur, innovator, and founder of Stockholm Farms. And, he joins us here today to discuss all the things he's doing. My name is Skye Blanks. I'm the ICSB Junior Project Manager and Director of the Knowledge Hub program. And we're super excited to start off this program. So Lucas, I'll give it to you. What is Stockholm Farms and, who are you and what are you all about?
Yeah, Skye, thank you for having me on again. It's great to be talking again and great to be engaged with the ICSB again. Let me tell you a little bit more about myself, a little bit more about what Stockholm does. So as Skye had mentioned, I'm a student at the George Washington University in Washington, D.C., but I'm actually in central Massachusetts right now. Worcester, if you're familiar with the area at all, is about an hour west of Boston. And so I am actually studying biology at George Washington with a minor in entrepreneurship. And that always surprises people that I'm not a business student. But so I suppose that's a little fun fact about me. And so I'm a Cambodian-American, as also Skye had mentioned. And so, my story is that I was born in Cambodia in the year 2000, and I was adopted from Cambodia in early 2001. So when I was just under a year old. And I was adopted by my fathers, who brought me to Worcester, Massachusetts, which is where I grew up and where I went to high school. And that'll be important in a moment. So I've only been back to Cambodia once when I was 13, and I've always sort of felt like I wanted to go back to Cambodia again and do work there. But I haven't really had the chance until now. It's sort of interesting how it played out, right? With COVID and restricting travel. Actually opened up that door for me. But so my introduction to entrepreneurship then was actually last year in mid 2019, and I started a biotech venture called ICSB Bio. And so ICSB is working on new genetic engineering and stem cell technologies towards creating a red blood cell substitute product. And so that's, of course, where my bio major comes in. And that really introduced me, to entrepreneurship, to a lot of different aspects of business, customer discovery, to, creating a business model and all of that, which is brand new to me, again, having no business experience. But I feel very strongly, though, that in both STEM, in business, you name the field, that anyone is able to teach themselves the skills and the knowledge that they need to work on whatever project it is that they're passionate about. So it's very important to me. And I think this was expressed through my lack of business experience prior, that if I want to go and start a new project, start a new company, that I just start and I don't wait for my education to catch up, if that sort of makes sense. But so this new nonprofit that we've started just in the last couple of months, Stockholm Farms. So Stockholm is, the word Stockholm is derived from the Khmer word, which is the language of Cambodia, the Khmer word Sahakom, the Khmer word for community. And we chose that phrase because I think at its core, what we're doing is we're trying to strengthen local communities in Cambodia. From more of a logistical perspective, I suppose, Sahakom is tackling a problem that has always existed and continues to persist around the globe, one of primarily poverty, one of poverty in Southeast Asia, and more specifically in rural Cambodia. And so the situation in Cambodia is largely that the poverty rate has decreased significantly in the last few years, but it's a very interesting statistic because while it is true that many people have been brought over the poverty line, they are just barely over the poverty line. I think the statistic is something along the lines of, if the average annual income, or the average, daily income decreases by 50 cents, the poverty rate would double in Cambodia. So while, yes, the official poverty rate is not nearly as high as it used to be, it's still certainly a problem. It's also interesting that the poverty rate is half that of a living wage in Cambodia. So, it's interesting how you might define poverty, I suppose. And so the majority of people in poverty, as is the case around much of the world, the majority of people in poverty are also employed in agriculture and in rural communities, of course. And so, in the States and in many other countries, agriculture has a very well worked out, well solidified and centralized supply chain, right? And we have a lot of industrialization around agriculture. One farm, I don't even know the number, is ginormous, and the technology they have to work that farm is incredible and allows them to work these giant areas of land. In Cambodia, that's really not the case. So there's very little technology involved in agriculture. And B, it's a highly decentralized supply chain. So the supply chain is made up primarily of small landholders, small farms, which maybe average around a hectare or so. And so then a collector by region will come around to each of those farms every day and pick up the day's crops, and will ship it themselves, on their truck to, the regional wholesaler, which will bring it to the city or the local market, whatever it is. And all of those connections are really built on personal relationships and geography. Whereas, in the US, we have massive farms, massive contracts, massive retailers. And so it's a much different system. And because there isn't a lot of technology, it's a very inefficient system. So both in the yields that farmers see, but also in the market, I guess I'd say, right? So one issue for farmers is there's very high price volatility. So, on Monday, a crop might be worth X, on Tuesday might be worth half of X. And so without not only a stable, but a predictable income, it really just perpetuates the cycle of poverty in Cambodia. And so we recognize this inefficiency, and we also recognize a new trend that we saw in the States, which is hydroponic vertical farming. And the idea behind hydroponic vertical farming is that you can grow crops indoors in a hydroponic medium, so in water instead of soil. And because it's indoors in a controlled climate, you don't have to use any sort of pesticides, fertilizers, any sort of chemicals, and all the products are organic. Additionally, you can stack these layers. Sort of hard to illustrate verbally, but you can stack these layers of farms, right? I think some of them are 10 layers high or so. And so instead of expanding out horizontally, you can expand vertically, and that really increases the efficiency and production of the farms. And so we've started to see these grow in the States. I think, again, I forget the statistic, but I think there's been billions of dollars poured into these startups. But I think what's really interesting is that in the States, the big value prop for hydroponic vertical farming is that because it's so efficient, you can move them closer to urban areas, and decentralize the supply chain. And the idea is that if that supply chain is a lot shorter, right, the food will be fresher, it'll taste better, it'll be more nutritious, and all of that good stuff. We want to implement it in Cambodia to centralize the supply chain and make it, give price stability, increase the yield that a farmer can reach, etc. And so the idea is that if we can essentially, right, make a farmer grow more crops with the same amount of time, we can sell more, pay farmers a higher living wage, and work on alleviating poverty that way. The other side of that work is that poverty, and again, this is not isolated to Cambodia, this is the case in many countries around the world, poverty causes the need for children to work, to contribute to the family's income. Then they aren't able to focus on education. And of course, that again perpetuates that cycle of poverty. And so the deal that we want to make with farmers in Cambodia is that you can work on our farm and we'll, double your income, but you have to send your children to school. And so in doing so, we hope to make both short-term investments in Cambodian economy and local communities by, of course, just paying a higher wage, but also long-term investments by making sure that by growing human capital, making sure that the workforce is better educated for decades to come. And so that's a bit about what we're doing at Stockholm.
Oh, that's awesome. No, I was thinking, you make a good point about the supply chain, and you see that with COVID-19, how disruptive it was for farmers in the United States, even a highly developed country, gain supplies from the main plains to the cities, and so you guys taking that and applying it to Cambodia, I think that's very interesting, of how I'm not sure how the chain goes from marketplace to the farm, but you will shorten that as well, or would you centralize all of that in like one, I guess, marketplace?
So I mean, I suppose it depends how you mean by shorten. If you mean from a timeline perspective, or from a geographical perspective. Um, so geographically, we have not chosen location yet, but we are thinking that it makes the most sense to move our farm to be somewhere closer to an urban center or peri-urban center, just because these farms do require a lot of energy, and they actually use, even though they're hydroponic, which is interesting, right? They actually use less water than traditional farming. I think somewhere around 90%, but the water does have to be very clean.
Yeah.
And so, we have to make sure the farm's somewhere that has the infrastructure to support that. And so, that might shorten the supply chain geographically, but, in terms of a timeline in Cambodia, it's unclear. I will say that is actually one thing that a decentralized supply chain in Cambodia is good at, right? Is moving food very quickly across
Yeah.
the country. So.
Uh, I see what you're saying with all that. There's a lot of hurdles. I know, relatively new. You guys have founded this, and you guys are still working through some of the barriers of entry and everything with Cambodia. But I think it's interesting that you guys focus on the human capital aspects, and growing education, and schooling. Have you guys, found schools in Cambodia that that in particular, that you would have the farmers send the students to, or how does the education in Cambodia kind of work?
So in theory, education in Cambodia is free for all. There are public schools. There are a few problems. Of course, there is the children have to work problem, but there's also a problem of that it's not actually free. So right, if you have to pay for a uniform, that's an expense that
Yeah.
many families can't afford. There aren't schools everywhere. Right. So if you live in a much more rural, much more isolated area, the nearest school might be 3 hours away. And that's hard even if you do have a car, right? But your family might not necessarily have a car. So we have a couple of options. We certainly, can work with the public schools. If we're in a more isolated area, there are a lot of really great other nonprofits and other organizations that are working in Cambodia to promote education as well. So there's certainly potential for a partnership there to send children to school there.
That's cool. I think that cross intersectionality that you see with, business, nonprofit, schooling and agriculture and kind of, all the aspects that you and your skill set of things that you have, gained from being a biologist and learning about that is very, very interesting to me. How do you see that, benefiting you and your, business ventures, either, be it Stockholm Farms or Ichosia or whatever else you are looking at?
How do I see my skill set
Yeah, your
benefiting?
skill set apply to the different niche markets that you're working in.
Yeah, well, I would say honestly, my molecular and cell bio knowledge plays absolutely no role in Stockholm. Um, Honestly, I would say that it was what I was talking about earlier, is that my biology knowledge, while great, really what I've learned through learning biology is how to learn in these new areas, especially areas that I think is commonly thought of that if you don't have a PhD, you can't do anything, which
Yeah.
is I believe to be completely untrue. Um, so, I feel really that's what I had to do with ICOSIA with biology, with genetic engineering and stem cells. I had to teach myself a lot to develop the technology, and I still have to teach myself a lot. And it's the same with business, certainly. These are company or ICOSIA I started when I was 18, so I was just going into college. Um, but I mean, yeah, really, I think that's my greatest skill is in being able to learn quickly, adapt quickly. I will say though that the experiences I've had at Icosia are certainly helping quite a bit with Stockholm. I think a lot of the things that when I was doing them for the first time, there was a lot of uncertainty about. I sort of know some best practices going into it the second time, which is certainly very helpful, right? So a little bit on, how do you incorporate an entity? What are the first steps when starting a new organization? How do you build a team? All of that is something I'm much more comfortable with now. And those are really universal skills, right? So they were applicable to ICOSIA biotechnology. They're applicable in an international development nonprofit, very different areas. I'm sure they'll be applicable in the next thing I do. So that's what's been very helpful.
Oh, that's cool. I think with your application of your nonprofit working with Stockholm Farms in Cambodia, how do you see small businesses, small marketplaces, farmers, kind of buy into your system, and how do you see that growing and scaling that?
So, what we realized is that there are a lot of nonprofits doing a lot of really great work all over the world. But a lot of those nonprofits have very similar models. And, I think a lot of people think that poverty hasn't gotten much better in the last 50 years, which is completely untrue. Poverty has gotten much better in the last 50 years, especially extreme poverty. But we sort of thought, the world doesn't need one more nonprofit that's doing the same thing. There's probably already nonprofits in Cambodia, you know, trying to build up Cambodian farmers and whatever. So we decided that we need to do something different. That if we were going to be the best people to do what we want to do, it had to be different. And so, I think the model that a lot of nonprofits take is to is sort of the idea of like microlending, or helping a farmer to build up their farm, giving them the tools and training that they need to do whatever. We didn't want to take that approach. What we did instead is we are going to build a farm and we are going to own that farm, and we are just going to pay people to work on that farm.
Mhm.
And so, as core level, what we're doing is we're giving people cash. Um, And so in terms of, this idea of acceptance and adoption and that sort of thing, it's a much reduced challenge, right? If I'm trying to teach a farmer, I'm going to say like best practices of their farming, I have to convince them that what they've been doing for generations is not as good as what
Yeah.
I'm going to do, which is probably not the easiest thing. With this model, all I have to say is show up at this place every day. You water the plants and pick the crops and whatever, and I'll pay you twice what you're earning now. It's a much more straightforward deal, I'd say. And so the great thing too is that that's relatively easy. Well, I don't want to say it's easy to scale. I'm going to say it's easier to scale than trying to convince again hundreds of people that the things they've been doing for generations is wrong. Um, with this, it's just like scaling a business. You build a bigger facility. Make sure you have the customers to buy the vegetables and employ more workers. And just by employing more workers, we're delivering higher value.
So what I'm seeing it as is instead of the other approach that many nonprofits might take of consulting with the farmers and saying like you were saying kind of trying to convince them that what they were doing wasn't the most efficient way or the practical way to do something. You are kind of taking the system and building your own system and farm and kind of employing the people that have these skill sets and applying to that, and then they buy into that aspect of, okay, this makes sense. This is actually really cool. Let me get, everyone else in the, my town or wherever to join in and let's, make this something. So I think that's a really unique approach because I think a lot of nonprofits, they operate with, aid, social programs, different things that just target the people, but you're targeting the system, which is something that I think is kind of cool.
Well, the other thing there too, right, is that one thing we had to be very careful about, I mean, we're still careful about, right, is that we feel very strongly we should not be reliant on donors, right? It works well for very large organizations, right? It works well for the Red Cross. It works well for Habitat for Humanity. You name it. These organizations have been around for decades, and people know what they do and whatnot. We're 3 months old. No one knows who we are. No one's giving us
Yeah.
tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? So we have to make sure that we're building a sustainable business model, and that we're generating enough revenue that if we never get another donation again, the organization will be able to continue on and continue to support farmers. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, you're in the early stages of kind of building that framework and I like to say the house, foundation of your nonprofit. Um, and so I guess going into that, like what like steps are you taking to connect with those people in Cambodia? Those investors, and in the States as well. And how are you seeking capital and continuing to build up your company?
Yeah. So, I think connecting with people in Cambodia is definitely one of the biggest challenges that we've seen. Partially because they're on the other side of the globe, partially because there's a language barrier, partially because of COVID. You name it. There's a lot of reasons why that's challenging. Without COVID, frankly, what we would have done is I would have hopped on a plane, landed in Cambodia, and I would have walked around farms and started asking people questions with my translator, of course. Now, because I don't have the phone number, I don't have the phone book for all the farms in Cambodia, and a lot of those people um, don't have access to the internet, so it's a different challenge. What we've been able to do though is we've just sent cold emails after tapping out our existing network, but we sent cold emails to supermarkets in Cambodia, any sort of farming organizations in Cambodia, any other nonprofits that are related in Cambodia. And I think our response rate is somewhere around 80%. So these people are happy to talk to us. We're very much we have very aligned goals, right? And so if there's potential for partnership, everyone's very excited about that. And of course, too, a lot of these organizations have offices both in Cambodia and in the States or in Europe or Australia. So that often helps too, if there's a local office.
So you're targeting kind of the bigger organizations that operate in Cambodia. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, some of them aren't ginormous, right? They might not have any employees. They might just have a board. They might, have only been around for a few years. These aren't ginormous organizations necessarily. I mean, bigger than we are, but they're not
Yeah.
ginormous organizations necessarily. But it's a very, I think the nonprofit world is a very collaborative community. And if there's a way for organizations to work together to help the people they're trying to help, that's something that everyone wants to do. And I've even said, if it turns out, especially when people ask us about our competitive analysis, right? If it turns out that my organization is not the best organization to do what we're doing to help farmers in Cambodia, we will take a step back and really investigate if that is the situation, because our goal is to help Cambodian farmers, however that comes, and it doesn't matter if it's us, right? But I think you asked too about funding.
Yeah.
I kind of forgot.
No, you're good.
So kind of against what I said earlier. So we are looking for donations right now. And I think that's coming largely at the moment through just friends and family and me personally. I think finding random donors that aren't in our network, while certainly one day possible, it's not necessarily very likely right now. And then we are looking for government grants, federal grants, private grants, that sort of thing. There are some grants at George Washington University, some business competitions. I do love business competitions very much. But the thing is that it's very hard to raise money, period. It's even hard to raise money if you're a brand new organization, you don't have a track record yet. And so everything that we do is about incremental minimization of risk and proving out the feasibility of the concept, right? So the first thing we did is we built a very small farm. It grows just about 100 plants. And we put it in my co-founder's living room in Oregon, just to prove that we can operate the farm, that it will actually grow things, right? So very incremental steps to minimize risk. And so once we take a few more of those steps, once we perhaps have a proof of concept down, or a pilot program down in Cambodia, then applying for those larger federal grants.
Oh, that makes sense. Edgar asked a good question. He said, is there any opposition to your model according to Cambodian culture?
I think the opposition is mostly in the status quo of the way things are. And there have been some attempts to implement new farming technologies, and just new technologies more broadly. I will say a few attempts to implement hydroponic farming. I have not seen any to implement vertical farming. And a lot of these attempts don't work. So it's sort of like, when we show up and we say, I know it didn't work last time, but this time it's going to be great, trust me. It's not really, it's just a lack of confidence, and sort of skepticism that this is going to be the magic time. And so that's again why we want to take this new approach to say, even if it doesn't work, we're still going to pay you, right? Because you're employed by us. So even if we're burning through cash, we're going to pay you. And just, and of course, to make sure that our farmers don't have complete dependence on us, so that if our pilot doesn't work for whatever reason, we are going to make sure to keep a certain amount of runway, whatever that is, 3, 6 months, 12 months, to make sure that if the farm goes out of business, we can still support that farm until they're able to find new employment.
Uh, that's very thoughtful. I think it kind of goes into what Talisa was asking about a farmer falling sick and unable to raise money for the bill. Do they have health insurance? So I think they're asking more so like the care for farmers. I guess you could ask this twice. How is the current farm system in Cambodia? Is it families running these farms or the corporations? And how are they care for that? And then also, I guess, how would your system differ from that system?
Yeah, so the way it is now, right, is that farmers usually own their own farm, and again, it's usually a very small farm. Maybe they have a few workers who help them on that farm, but oftentimes they don't. And so there's no such thing as health insurance, right? There might be like a local doctor, but there might not be. And even if there is, it might be very expensive. And even in the city, in Phnom Penh, the capital, healthcare isn't great. And again, it's one of those things where, in theory, there is free healthcare for all. In practice, there really isn't. The other thing is that Cambodian healthcare is not of the highest quality. So a lot of people, if they have the means, end up going to Thailand or Vietnam on the west and east borders, respectively, for healthcare. And if they really have the means, they'll go to Europe or Australia. So the question of, can we provide healthcare insurance? Maybe for small things. I don't think that would be I don't think that would be a primary goal of the pilot, at least, right? The other thing is that if the health insurance doesn't cover going to Thailand or Vietnam, it still might not be that effective. And so, sort of something that's, I think, been challenging for us. I think it's challenging for a lot of people who just want to do good in the world, is that we can't fix every problem at the same time. We kind of have to focus on what we're doing. Even this dual focus on education and increasing wage. It sounds like it makes great sense, right? But even that can be difficult to maintain that dual focus. But we do hope that just the increase in wage can support healthcare needs. And the other thing is that I think it's very much a case-by-case basis. So it's not we're not a big corporation. We don't have a rule book for all the things that might happen. So if we had a farmer and whatever happened, if they had some illness, we would certainly look at how much cash we had, have a look at how much cash I have personally, and if we were able, we would certainly figure something out.
Yeah, that makes sense. You only can work with what you got, right? So an infrastructure that doesn't exist in Cambodia that's efficient, then it's kind of hard to implement. But no, I'm glad that you guys are trying to your best to accommodate these things. But kind of shifting gears, I want to talk about the student aspect of you being a student. How do you balance all the stuff that you do with these ventures, and where have you begun? How did you begin your, I guess, entrepreneurial journey with being interested in entrepreneurship, your like your first venture, and how's like school? How you balance school with all that?
Yeah, I don't. No, so I mean, I think what I've been able to do two things at university that have been very helpful. I've been able to condense my schedule into just 2 days, and I've been able to tailor my schedule to what will be immediately helpful to what I'm working on, right? So in August of 2019, I coached a biotechnology, genetic engineering, and stem cell technology company. That semester I took genetics, right? So I very much try to make sure that my classes complement whatever I'm working on. It also certainly helps me just to be able to sort of section out parts of the day for different ventures or school or whatever it is. So right now, basically I have Monday afternoons and Wednesday afternoons for school. And then Monday mornings and Wednesday mornings, I try to work on all the things that I was late on from the earlier week. And then, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday is just meetings all day. And so sometimes I'll break it up like, Tuesday will be ICOJA meetings and Thursday will be Stockholm meetings or whatever happens to work that week. But no, it's certainly it's a lot. I would say I try to be as encouraging as possible, but I would say, don't start a company if you don't want to put a lot of time into it. It's not going to work out. It's certainly a very time-consuming endeavor.
No, I think that's a good point because, you have to give your 100% into something and for it to succeed. Because if you give only 50, it's only give out 50, in quality. And you also, I guess, going into that, like, how did you find your team members and, people to help you build up, these companies?
Mm. So, I say this a lot, is that team is the most important aspect of a new venture. And just to be clear, I'm not taking credit for that idea. I've certainly taught that. I did not invent that idea. But no, team is critical, right? So if you're in a tech venture, if you don't have a good product or not, you don't have a good technology, but you have a really great team, the team will be able to figure out how to make a pivot. So such that whatever technology you do have can reach the market. Or similarly, if you don't have a good market, but you have a really good team, the team will figure out how to adapt that technology to a new market. So team is critical. Advisors are critical. Actually, this is interesting, right? One thing that worked out really well about COVID is that COVID sort of, I think, helped us to realize that we are not confined anymore to in this case Boston or DC. It really opens up the entire world to build team. So my immediate team at Stockholm is, we have East Coast, we have West Coast, we have North, South, you name it, all over the States. We are confined to the States, but we do work with people, certainly in Cambodia at ICOJA. We work with people in China and the Netherlands, Taiwan, all over the world. How do we build team? We certainly, I would say at ICOJA, we try to tap in as much as possible into the George Washington community. I will say that George Washington University, DC is not a hub for biotech. So we have partners at Northeastern, and that's where we found a lot of people who were very interested. But it's a much different situation for international development. George Washington University in DC is a great place if you want to work in international development. So I think I put a post out on my Instagram, and within 24 hours we had a couple dozen people who want to work with us, and so we didn't even have to go to other schools or anything like that, and we just chose from those applicants.
That's really cool. I think that's important. Having these hubs, with universities. I guess, how does the university, as George Washington University, play into your success, and how has it helped you find these different opportunities, people to work with, advisors, because a lot of these other people from other different universities might not know how to, find those or be that resource for students, or, create that hub. So I guess, what has worked well for that with you?
Yeah, so I will say George Washington University, and this was not a criteria that I looked at when I was looking at colleges, but George Washington University turned out to be a really great place for entrepreneurship. And I swear they did not tell me to say that. That's my own opinion. So they have some really great resources. Certainly financial resources. So they have small customer discovery grants for technology-based ventures. They have two business competitions, actually, one in the fall and a much bigger one in the spring. That's all non-dilutive funding. Then they have some more qualitative resources. So they have advisors, entrepreneurs and residents, a lot of different workshops on different topics. And so, not every school has that, certainly, but find out what your school does have. I think that can be as simple as just Googling your school and then entrepreneurship, or your school in business competition or whatever. It happens to be, or a lot of schools have offices for that, offices for innovation, even offices for research, research administration. They might not be directly applicable, but they'll probably be able to point you in the right direction. My advice would be take advantage of all of those resources. There was a grant program last year that we did that I really only did because I wanted the money for it. I wanted the grant, but the program piece turned out to be equally important. It really taught me a lot about how to do customer discovery, how to engage with potential stakeholders, and so that was a huge surprise, honestly. So I would say, take advantage of every opportunity, especially when you're first starting out. Also, just investigate opportunities that aren't necessarily at your university, but are at your you're just in your general area. So like the state of Massachusetts has a lot of programs to support life sciences companies that are just Massachusetts based. So they have they have some great office spaces. They have funding available. They actually they paid for 2 of our interns this summer, just because the state wants to build up the life sciences presence. And so there are a lot of opportunities like that, both at the state level, city level, whatever it happens to be. Certainly the national level, right? And then the other thing is, again, at the national level is that, and not being confined to your university, is that we've been able to take advantage of a lot of national business competitions. This is in the U.S., but I'm confident that there are national business competitions elsewhere in the world. There are certainly international business competitions, right? I know I can think of probably 3 or 4 just off the top of my head. But so I would say really take advantage of the global community.
I definitely think ICSB is a global network, and the people definitely
Perfect example.
reach out. There's different things going on and different resources, and like it goes back into the whole mission of what you're talking about with the farm is human capital, and us being stuck with COVID has made that even more important to us because we're not getting that direct interaction with people. You have to reach out and see that you can access all the people that are around the world that are resources, and via Zoom and you guys on here with the live, you are learning about something that might not be happening in your neck of the woods, but it's something that you can connect with and further your research on, which is, I think, is special, and I think more people need to be doing that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, Edgar, we're recording the presentation. It'll be on our YouTube, and also for on our live right now on Facebook, but we'll get that out to you through our mailing list later. But awesome. And also here, let me put your website down for everyone to click on.
Sure.
So you can find out more about the program at the website I just put into the in the chat. For everyone on the recording, I'll put it into the bio. But no, thank you so much. I think you've gone over and beyond about all the things that you've done and the entrepreneurship and initiatives that you have taken. I think it's really interesting and very helpful for for young entrepreneurs in college, high school, and also for academics who are looking into how to help and use these resources to replicate it for their students. So thank you so much, Lucas, for being on here.
Yeah, certainly. Thank you for the opportunity. And to anyone who's watching, feel free to go to the website. There is a contact form. There's also an email. I would recommend using the email. It's an info email, but I read it. So if you'd like to chat with me at all, I'm certainly happy to do that as well. But thank you again, Skye.
Of course. All right, everyone. We'll see you next time. This is a new series, so we'll have another one by October. So stay tuned, and we'll see you soon. Bye, everyone.